In multiple data points, we are watching the decline of American supremacy. We're watching the dollar become less popular. We're watching American influence, international influence reduce itself. We're watching the rise of a new anti-Western power base, right? With the combination of China, Iran, Russia, and other Iranian, North Korean and Iranian counterparts all coming together to create a counterbalance to the West. What a fascinating time to be alive. It does not mean we have a pleasant few decades ahead of us. It doesn't mean that.
Yeah.
But it does mean that the world that you and I will see from our deathbed is going to be so different than the world that we see today and the world that we saw when we were brought into this world, right?
How dare you?
And that change, I find change to be a necessary fact of life. Change,
It's certainly a fact.
yeah, change is something that will happen, and the people who succeed are the people who can adapt and evolve with that change the most effectively. So essentially what we're seeing, in my opinion, essentially what we're seeing around the whole world is a question of whether democracy is truly what serves governments.
You think that's what's driving this?
That's the question.
Really?
And you can see, and here's why I say that. Most people would say that Donald Trump is a populist and or possibly authoritarian type of leader, right? I think even Donald Trump would say that he's somewhere in the mix, right? He is not a professional politician democratically elected through blah, 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 right? He's something else. We have literally watched the recent elections in Canada and Australia both elect far left-leaning leaders, specifically because those leaders were anti-Trump and the populations of those countries in the moment were also anti-Trump. They didn't have high chances of winning. These are two strong American allies, Canada and Australia, right? They're part of the Five Eyes networks, the 5 countries that share all intelligence, right? And these left-leaning leaders were elected exclusively in a final push because they were like, we don't believe in Donald Trump, and their numbers soared and they were elected. So now these countries are stuck with these leaders, not because of their policies or their backgrounds or their histories of success, but because of their political stance against Donald Trump. Simultaneously, we see a leader in Romania, a leader in Portugal. We see continuing growth across, we see Germany. We see these countries that are quote unquote democracies doing the opposite, voting in strong right-leaning authoritarian leaders, specifically because they are pro-Trump, right? Germany's different because they dissolved their parliament, they dissolved their office of the chancellor, and then they couldn't come to a conclusion on the next chancellor. And then when they did come to a conclusion on the next chancellor, the parliament didn't endorse him and he had to go through a second round of voting. Germany's all fucked up right now. And that's Germany, man. One of the wealthiest, most stable, strongest countries in Europe can't get their shit together. Portugal's had multiple prime ministers in the last 3 years. The UK only recently landed on a prime minister that they have let sit for longer than a year. Like, Europe is all fucked up for the same reasons, because the people can't decide, do we want democracy or do we want strongman leadership? Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia flourishing under strongman leadership. Russia having the best years of the last decade under strongman leadership.
Really? You think this is the best? They what?
The best for them in the last 10 years?
Really? I thought their economy was like getting hammered.
Even as it's getting hammered now, it's still better than it was 5, 7, 10 years ago.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, I'm mismapping Russia.
The war in Ukraine has created a wartime economy in Russia, and people are getting paid more. They're producing more. Their economy isn't happy, but it's better than it's been, right? China's in the same place. China's struggling with their economy, but they have a collective enemy right now with the West. So especially with the tariffs that are happening right now, right? Every Chinese working age person is looking at the United States thinking, you are an enemy of China because you're taking away my job. You're shutting down my factory. You're making it hard for me to feed my kids. You're the enemy. You're the enemy. What's that person going to be in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years? If they're not a direct soldier, they're going to be somebody who's looking for ways to get into some military role that creates revenue from a wartime economy. You were mentioning this during your Lusitania example. Governments have learned through the lens of history, wartime is a huge economic boost. The big concern that Europe has with Russia is that Russia is not going to stop after Ukraine, not because Russia actually has ambition beyond Ukraine, but because they can't. They can't stop. Now that engine has been developed, now that they're creating 1,400 missiles, right? Why would they stop? Instead, they would find little small ways to keep the conflict going and further test NATO, right? That's what Europe is most concerned about. So we live in this world where this is not just happening in one or two pockets, it's happening everywhere, right?
Do you think Putin is so incentivized to keep it going that the war just isn't going to end?
So I think Putin is incentivized to take what he wants in Ukraine. No reason for him to back out of Ukraine now. No reason for him to stop and even come close to accepting Zelensky's terms, because he is doing what intelligence officers do. He is systematically degrading the influence of Zelensky and trying to degrade the influence of Donald Trump. The difference being that Donald Trump knows how this game works, so he knows how to extricate himself from the degradation and save his own reputation. But Zelensky's fucked, right? Zelensky once said, "I will never sit at the table with Putin." Now Zelensky's bitching about the fact that he went to a table and Putin didn't show up, right? That makes Zelensky look like an idiot, as if he doesn't do enough to make himself look like an idiot. That does not help. He has insisted on 1991 borders. His own senior liaisons for diplomacy around the world are saying that's an unreasonable expectation. So what kind of leader is it when your head of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the United States is saying that the president's goals are unrealistic? It's a complete meltdown of any kind of reputation. Putin understands it. All Putin has to do is keep launching ammunition and flying drones. Fucking dude, this pisses me off. Zelensky launched one of the largest drone strikes on Russia in advance of the May 9th celebration. The May 9th celebration is Russia's annual celebration to celebrate the end of World War II and the destruction of the Nazi Party. Do you remember what his original terms were for invading Ukraine?
Yeah.
That they were still Nazi. So somehow this country that's trying to make itself look like it's the victim literally attacks Moscow the eve of a celebration that's there to celebrate the defeat of the Nazi Party, when the original reason Putin went into Ukraine was because he said there were Nazis there. Right. Like these are horrible strategic decisions made over and over again. If not by Zelensky, then by the advisory board that he's taking information from, assuming that advisory board is even trying to help Ukraine. So my point
That's
is,
more terrifying.
Yeah, we have this incredible world that is a powder keg working around us. You have Trump in the Middle East to decide whether or not Sunni Islam is going to support the Palestinians or whether they're going to try to bring Israel to the table. You've got Netanyahu doing shit on his own that the world disagrees with, counting on America to back him up, but Trump is distancing himself from Netanyahu. And that's before you start getting into the stuff like the military. Pete Hegseth, our current Secretary of Defense, has set only two priorities in motion for the entire DoD. Only two. One, protect the homeland. Do you know what the second priority is? Degrade China. That's it, right? That is the memo directing all of DoD. Two priorities, nothing else. Defend the homeland, which basically means put missiles on our shores, and degrade China. Nothing else. Not degrade adversaries, not counter, political whatever dissidents or influence from the East. None of that. It specifically says degrade and deter China. It's amazing. That is our world right now.
Degrade China with the DoD.
Lots of different ways. I mean, some of it's denying their access to technology. Some of it is actively seeking areas to frustrate or waste their resources in third country locations, right? Countering their influence with the Belt and Road Initiative, countering their support to Iran or Russia or North Korea, right? Taking action with special forces in zones where, Chinese interests are at play. Some of it is cyber attacks. Some of it is space-based assets. Some of it is information warfare. Like there's lots of different ways that you can degrade. And I think what's happening is the United States is understanding that China is a major threat that no one has been calling China. They've been calling it Asia Pacific, Pacific Rim. The East Asia pivot is what Obama called it, right? And that was 2008. It's 2025 right now. Yeah. So we've been sugarcoating this threat for a long time. But now Hegseth is saying, let's just call it what the fuck it is.
How serious do you think the threat of China is? When I look at Thucydides' trap, when I look at the realities of geopolitics, when I look at being in second place is a lot worse than being in first place, just like, yeah, we've got to be looking there. When I look closer at the corporate espionage stuff, it's like, it's actually pretty serious. When I look at that they're the hub and spoke of the entire world's manufacturing, and you can't have an adversary who might become your rival, a rival who might become your adversary. You can't have them control your drones when drones are how the war is going to be fought. Am I just being overly paranoid, or is this really where we're headed?
You're not being paranoid. You're being pragmatic right now. China is the single largest threat to the United States. If that's not an opinion, that's laid out in the Director of National Intelligence estimate. That's laid out by the Secretary of Defense. That's been communicated by the president in multiple policies that have been set forth. Like, it's not paranoia. There's a huge narrative bias that happens in media and other places where they try to reduce it and they try to soften it, right? They try to talk about decoupling, et cetera, et cetera. But they're our largest threat. And keep in mind that this same conversation is happening somewhere in China, where that conversation is saying the same thing about us, where they say the United States is the single largest threat to China, right? And the success of our people and the success of our long-term growth and success is being hampered and reduced by American influence and American activity. The fact that those two conversations are happening in both countries just goes to show where the future is truly headed, right? And all the examples you say are exactly right. The thing that has me the most kind of unnerved is that since about 2015, there have been multiple economists who have come out and said that the dollar is losing its influence as the central currency of the world, right? Not losing quickly necessarily, but there's absolutely a shift happening. When we then froze assets from Russia because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, it was like $300 billion worth in assets. That was a huge signal to China that said, hey, if we're willing to do this to them, guess what we're willing to do to you? So now China started decoupling from us. China has its own issues that it's dealing with, but let's not be coy. We have our own fucking issues that we're dealing with too. They have their economic issues. We have our economic issues. They have their real estate issues. We have our real estate issues. They have their whatever. We have our whatever. The difference is they have a shit ton of people and their primary target is like 150 miles off their southern shore, where our primary threats are thousands of miles away from us. And it's going to take a whole hell of a lot of professional military organization to do anything against those threats. Imagine a world where Russia launches a limited campaign against Estonia, a NATO country, at the same time as China launches any kind of cyber attack or aggression against Taiwan. What's the United States going to do? What's NATO going to do? Are we going to act on Article 5 and go to Estonia's aid? Or are we going to let Estonia defend itself for a little while to watch what happens? Are we going to rush to Taiwan to give Taiwan aid? Are we going to let Taiwan work on its own for a little bit to see what happens? Are we going to divide our forces and go in two different directions that have an entire continent between them? What are we going to do? This is what's happening at the boardroom tables in Moscow and Beijing. Thoughts like this, conversations like this. Probability and reliability matrix.
Do you see them as working in any sort of coordinated fashion in that way? Or you're just saying if China saw that Russia made that move, that they might do something?
I would say coordinated, but not necessarily collaborative, right? Because what we're seeing is that the cooperation that's growing between Russia, Iran, North Korea, fundamentalist Islam, China, they're not agreeing on an ideology. They're not collaborating on ideas. When it's pragmatic, they're sending some of their advisors to go help the other country, like we're seeing with North Korean troops fighting in Russia, right? But we're also seeing China sending troops to fight, like mercenary troops to fight both for Ukraine and for Russia. You've got lots of opportunity for countries to get involved in Sudan and Syria, where they can test their technology, they can test their tactics. Everybody understands, all of our adversaries understand the United States is second to none when it comes to real-time war conflict experience. We know what it's like to get shot at in real time. We know what it's like to run coordinated operations in real time. NATO countries don't know how to do that. China doesn't really know how to do that. Russia has been learning it for the last almost 3 years, right? So that's a very valuable skill to have. And that's a skill that everybody's very eager to develop. So what I would say is, because we see such pragmatic cooperation between them, I could see a phone call between Xi Jinping and Putin where they say, hey, this is what I'm going to do on this day about. If you see it happen and it benefits you, it would be really helpful to me for you to do that thing, right? Or just giving you a heads up. I'm not telling this to anybody else, but this is going to happen. Maybe it'll happen in July, right? And then they can plan in separate silos to help keep compartmentation going. But for sure, we are seeing that all of those countries are benefiting from the cooperation with each other in a collective push against Western power.